VR becomes her. I wonder if a warning truly even matters anymore, after everything has already come to its resolution. I didn't listen, as so many of my peers. When the urban eagles, as they like to call themselves, started protesting in front of all the Fortune 500 companies and investment firms in our major metropolitan cities, did I heed their warning, or did I just scoff at my TV like the rest of my schoolmates, boiling down their major gripes into one simple soundbite fed to us through our benevolent media? Out of all the sensible talking points they outlined in their picket lines, all we really got out of it was, don't wear the goggles, or you'll never take them off. It was laughable. We all saw the memes where people with oversized VR goggles on their heads were reading satanic symbols and propaganda slogans from eye charts at the doctor's office. Everyone took that slogan, which was slapped across many a picket sign and oversized flag, as something literal. And it was so easy to pass them off when it conjured something so silly and descriptive in the mind's eye, as if the VR goggles would literally clamp down over the back of the head like metal spider legs, never to relax its grip. I, on the other hand, took the advice of the urban eagles as something more metaphorical and spiritual. Sure, I could agree with them that the VR goggles would certainly be a slippery slope where most people would no longer see it necessary to meet each other face to face. Why put on clothes when it can be all done in the virtual space? And why risk making mistakes on your first couple surgeries for those practicing medicine? You don't need cadavers or test patients anymore, not when you can operate a virtual surgical knife. I'd already seen how quickly people's attention spans and social skills had degraded with the onset of the smartphone. Wouldn't virtual reality have an even more dramatic effect? Especially now that every company, business, school, university, and nonprofit were utilizing VR for training purposes? Now anyone graduating from high school, I being one of the most recent, is required to don the VR goggles during a trial period, working with one of the most sophisticated algorithms in the world to pair you with your future career. And the goggles are there for you to practice this new task in the virtual realm, in essence testing the success rate of the algorithm to determine if you are in fact fit for the job, and allowing you to try, explore, and fail within the limits of the job as long as possible during an indiscriminate period that could last up to a year after graduation. Honestly, with everything that I'd heard from the urban eagles, and from what I understood about the dangers of becoming too comfortable in the snares of new technology, I had seen how many of my friends and family were thriving in their new roles as lawyers, bankers, teachers, and the list goes on. And the success rate was there, as these were interests my peers already had, and the algorithm was able to pick up on that and choose the perfect simulation for them to play in. And it is like playing, at least that's how it had been described to me. Virtual reality had always been a means of escape and fun for our culture, and as the urban eagles picked up their signs and left society altogether to form homesteading communities in tight-knit circles outside in the reservations set aside for them by the state, we all allowed our future careers to be gamified, and I was one of the first in line. The urban eagles had warned us all that the free goggles provided to us by our schools were one of the loudest warning signs. If something is free, you're the product, they would chant in the streets. But I accepted the gift of those simple plastic goggles, resembling the blinders a snowboarder might wear, and I took them home to strap across my face in my bedroom to complete my assigned homework for the night and to log my 2 hours for my new job. Most of my friends had logged 100 hours or more, and they were still perfectly able-bodied, enough to know the virtual from the reality, and all of them had been more than able to remove the glasses from their eyes at the end of each session. So I strapped on my goggles for the first time there in my bedroom, and I learned there in the virtual waiting room of white light what my assignment was. I'd always wanted to be a writer, contributing a new insight never expressed, or proclaiming my own manifesto/warning like the urban eagles. I, an 18-year-old woman who had never taken a trade class or applied for a team sport in all of my days at school, was assigned to the job of inspecting and condemning houses. This was quite a blow to my constitution and sensibilities. I had never pictured myself doing physical labor, or anything so mindless and repetitive. I didn't even see why this sort of job would ever need to be programmed, as all I did in my virtual realm, for 4-hour bursts after school, was walk up to houses in an unexplained abandoned neighborhood, with no context, and spray paint the doors, with either a red X to signify that the house was condemned, or a red 0 to show that the house was still being inspected. And part of the job didn't even involve me entering these houses. The written instruction booklet I carried along with me in my digital hands forbade me from ever entering the houses. Isn't that what house inspectors did? They entered houses to see if the home was suitable for living or not. But no, this very useful skill was not part of my initial training. Perhaps it would be after I leveled up. But the booklet outlined to me by address which house would be marked with a red X or 0. All I did, or would ever have to do, is walk to the house, pick it out from the booklet, and spray paint the required symbol across the door, over and over again. And there was no explanation as to why there was never anyone else there in the neighborhood streets with me. There were no signs of catastrophe, no flooding or forest fires or bug infestations. It was simply an empty suburb, identical to my own, and all the houses looked pristine. There didn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to tell me why one house would be unsafe compared to its neighbor. And I still went to school every day, trying to find fulfillment in my writing classes and telling no one of my extracurricular experiences. While others recited their very real storylines of arresting felons and rescuing people from flaming buildings in their virtual reality narratives, I was busy spraying doors, like a logger in a forest. And I couldn't help but wonder what the urban eagles were doing at that moment in their perfect convents, far outside the city limits. Still, I was willing to stick it out and log my hours, with no reassurance from anyone living and breathing that my time in this simulated internship would soon be over. I soldiered on and fulfilled my duties as they were outlined in my guidebook, adamant with the fact that it could always be worse, and I might have been assigned cleaning up sewers somewhere. At least I got to walk around and exercise my virtual legs in the sun, and it was always a bright and sunny day. So real that I could feel my bare arms and legs tanning as I crossed from porch to porch. I even made a game of it, guessing before each turn of the page in my book which house would be condemned. And I had a 50-50 chance, of course. More often I was right. A lot more houses were condemnable in this neighborhood. Then came the day that I crossed a familiar busy main street in my town, completely void of cars or pedestrians, and ventured into my own neighborhood. I toured through my old haunts with the most unpleasant, uneasy feeling prickling my neck and scalp, and I didn't think it was physical discomfort from the goggles. I walked past my elementary school with its motionless tetherballs on chains, proceeding to the grocery store, and I had never seen the parking lot so empty. Not even a breeze had been programmed into my scene to trace the clouds across the sky or stir the bits of trash in the gutters. It was as if I was frozen in time, just me, my uniform, a notebook, and a spray can. As instructed by the book, I began to tag the houses, some of them my neighbors and old friends from middle school I hadn't kept up with in years. I began to notice that the houses I was marking with the X were more often than not those of my classmates, who were all undergoing the VR training program like me. I marked them all as condemned. And then I was there at my own house, and I almost wanted to stop there, forego the time restraints and rip the goggles off my face, never to wear them again, and ready to skip town and join the eagles in their anarchist sex in God's green earth, as we were meant to be. But I flipped the page in the notebook and saw that my door was to be inscribed with that fateful X. I'd like to tell you that this was all I had to see, and that I did exactly as I threatened previously, throwing away my future career with those free gaming goggles. But I walked up the front steps of my front porch and marked my door like all the rest, satisfying my slotted time for the day and allowing me to free my eyes and go to bed. But I never did fall asleep that night, and I couldn't help but wonder how free the code of this program was. What was to stop me from walking through the front door of my own virtual house? Would it be locked? Would the game time out with a massive game over scrolling across my vision? Or would I open that door and see just zeros and ones, empty program space? I had to know. So at close to midnight on that school day, I sat up on the corner of my bed and strapped the goggles across my face once again. I entered my neighborhood scene, but now at night, as I would expect to find right outside my own physical window. And the street lights were buzzing above my head. The porch light on my house was on, as my mom always left it, and there was the sloppy and dripping red X that I had marked it with. With my heart thumping in my throat, either in my virtual one or my physical, I can't say which, I cautiously approached my front porch and tried the door. It was locked, again, thanks to my mom's diligence, but I was quick to drop the paint can/notebook from my other hand and reach into my back pocket of my work shorts. There was my wallet, and in it I found the spare key to my front door, exactly in the secret pocket where I had always stashed it. I inserted the key and pushed open the door. I held my breath, expecting the worst, but I only saw my ordinary living room, which I had always taken for granted. Every time I came home after school, there was the half-finished puzzle on the coffee table that my brother had started the afternoon before, and there was the glass of water I had left by the sink. Now, feeling like a dreamer outside of her body, I crept up the stairs, which made all the right creaks in all the right spots, and I wondered if I should be careful, or else risk waking my parents in the nearest bedroom at the top of the stairs. But I passed that off as silly. This was a video game. So I charged the rest of the way down the hall and pushed open my bedroom. There I was, sitting on the edge of the bed with my head bowed slightly, staring into nothing with a twitching lower lip, and hands resting palms down on my pajama legs. It was such a strange feeling to look at myself like that, so I snapped out of it and tried to remove the VR goggles from my head with my physical hands. But all I could do was move my digital hands, and I touched my naked head of hair, where there was no restraining strap to be found. I began to panic, closing my eyes to snuff out that virtual space as best I could, willing for my mind to return to my physical body, sitting there in the bed with my hands in my lap. But I couldn't conjure that real scene, no matter how hard I tried. And I ran to the bed, shaking my physical self and grappling with the goggles across her face. She lolled onto the bed like a broken doll, and I had to help her lay down as I struggled with the strap across the back of her head. But the clasp was locked, or stuck, as I had never encountered before. I started to scream then, calling for my mom, dad, and my brother, but no one came to the doorway, no matter how high I raised my volume. I was about to give up and run to my brother's room next door when light suddenly filled my shaded window from the other side, and I opened the blinds to see a vehicle was snailing into my cul-de-sac from the adjoining road, as big as a street sweeper and just as slow. But its bright headlights on the front of its chassis shot crazy jagged shadows across my neighborhood, as bright as a train spotlight, and eerily white as the waiting room in the VR space when I was first assigned my job. And this vehicle was not driving along the street, but along the sidewalk, seemingly passing through the fire hydrants and recycle bins on the curb as if it wasn't actually there at all. And I could hear it now, a rattling, clunking, wheezing sound that was accentuated by hissing pistons and releases of air. I couldn't make out any identifiable markings on the vehicle as it shambled closer due to its invasive spotlight. And it paused at each house before trolling on. And I knew why. I had marked all of my immediate neighbors' houses in the cul-de-sac with zeros, which meant their homes were safe for now. Only mine had the X. And as soon as the vehicle was in front of my driveway, I could see that there were no markings on its sleek silver body, and there were no windows or windshield, only that adjustable spotlight, which swung around to blind me and fill my window once again. I ducked down and the light disappeared, but the clunking, hissing, chortling intensified, and I peeked over the sill to watch the vehicle, its light extinguished, turn like a swivel chair to face my front door. Its chrome cowcatcher was now directed at the front porch like the tip of a spear, and it began to creep forward onto the front lawn and up to my mother's well-manicured garden path. It didn't move on tires but what looked like a million centipede legs, leaving a trail of dead grass behind it. I watched as a trunk door opened in the back and someone stepped out. I seized with surprise to see that it was an exact copy of me, but not the me in my work uniform, but the me in my red plaid pajama pants and mussed-up hair. That version of me stood by the mailbox, patiently waiting with a dead expression as the armored vehicle crept up the porch. And from the unmistakable creaking I could hear on the stairs directly outside my room, I knew the thing had passed through the front door without opening it and was closing in quickly. Although I understand everything now, I didn't fully perceive the true motives of that machine in that moment, and I only thought about gathering up my body in that split second between the loudest crack on the top stair and the first eye contact I made with the waiting double outside my house, and I saw that she was smiling. I wish I had gathered up my sleeping self in my arms to take with me. But in that fight or flight moment, all I could think to do was run into my closet, push up the attic door in the ceiling, and claw my way up into the asbestos-laden crawlspace. I listened to the thing as it bumped into my room below me, a mechanical muttering and chortling all too clear now, as it either recited its inner monologue or responded to some far-off instructions. I heard it pause considering, air hissing, before its little legs were clattering again, and I heard the bed creak as it no doubt interacted with it. What it did with my body, I cannot say, and whatever it did, it was not enough to unplug me from the virtual reality I had found myself in, and I did not wait to learn how it would make its escape or listen to hear if the imposter outside would then come into my room and sleep in my bed, pretending to be me. I crawled to the other side of the attic, pushed through the vent cover in the back, and scaled the roof so that I could jump down into my backyard. I didn't look over my shoulder or try to alert anyone I thought might be alive in my childhood home. I ran and ran until I was well outside of the city, without ever stopping for a bite to eat or a drink of water, and never tiring, as those limitations no longer affected me there in my body, whose skin would never burn in the sun, and whose breath never failed her lungs. I was even blessed to find one of those urban eagle communes, and I inspected their empty yurts and thumbed through their endless stockpiles of storable foods, guns, and water jugs. But I never found another soul. I'm still waiting for one, but I don't expect to find anyone anytime soon. At least not any eagles. They had been the smart ones and never touched the VR goggles as many of us had done, and they had been so right. Literally. The goggles weren't meant to ever be taken off. No, the eagles weren't programmed to be in this world with me. I can only hope that someone had bucked the system just enough like I had, and maybe peered through their dark glasses outside of their normal work hours, at midnight or later, when the chrome creature went to collect its condemned souls. I can only hope that person had made their escape like me, free from their goggles and free from their physical body, and I can only hope they'll come looking for their slice of paradise out here in the woods, as the urban eagles had promised. Perhaps not to find full protection in the form of prepped stockpiles, but another lost soul to wait out eternity with, while the great underground servers and processors are still pumping out enough power for this realm to render as realistic pixels in front of my quote-unquote eyes. And still I wait, and even though I do not sleep, I dream.
The Moon's Majesty. She tightened the blindfold around her eyes and then tilted her head to the side, as if trying to look at something from another angle. She gripped the handle of her sword tight, her jaw working thoughtfully. Walker watched her vain attempt at protecting herself and noted a meager elegance about her work. He saw a perfect balance. Her legs met at an acute angle as they crossed into the lotus position, and the sword in her hand acted as a weight to keep her grounded. Her back was to the water, and if she chose to let go of that weapon, which outsized her by more than a few pounds, she would go tumbling backward down the hill and into the sea. She couldn't see the water crashing at her back, but she could hear it, and Walker was sure the noise filled her head. Her purple robes were torn and frayed at the knees, and the sash had long ago been discarded, making for a loose-fitting garment of soiled silk, barely hanging off her shoulders. She had chopped her hair short just recently, and he looked upon her face for the first time, which held a boyish quality he quite admired. Her jewels were gone, traded months ago for spending money. Her slippers were now replaced with hemp sandals, and her arms and legs were ripe with bruises and scrapes. Her face was no longer rosy. It was tan with sun and hard like leather. She was so beautiful. Walker tried to keep her mind occupied. He wanted her to forget that they only had a slice of bread to their names and two dull swords to protect them from harm. He wanted her to forget that she would never see again, if only for a moment. So he told her a story as they sat upon that barren hill, where the grass did not dare to grow, and where a circle of ritualistic stones kept them enclosed inside a pit of spent magic. Walker couldn't say what that hill had once served as. A refuge, a home, or a place of sacrifice? Now it was there to mark the place of his last stand. He told her a story. It was the only one he knew. "Do you know what my first memory is?" he asked her. He leaned against his walking cane and folded into a sitting position. The morning was new all around them, and the cool wind picked up, spraying them with ocean foam. He turned up his soiled collar, but she was unmoved, clutching her sword defiantly, staring into the darkness of her blindfold and into the darkness of her own mind. "It seems so strange, but I was only a lad. I remember looking out at a road, and would you believe that it grew before me, as though it were being paved before my very eyes? I had a knapsack in my arms. I'm not sure where I got it. I wasn't sure what I was doing or who I was. I followed the road and found a cottage. Two people took me in, and they became my mother and father. My father was a magician, and my mother a priestess. My father taught me the art of alchemy, which later became my base interest in medicine. My mother taught me about the oversoul and the path to enlightenment. I never found enlightenment, I'm afraid. I suppose it is too late for that. I know this story," she told him quietly. "How? I never told you my past." "Next you left your father's home and met a mentor, who initiated you into your new community. You fell in love with a girl, you won, you lost, and then cut your ties with the world in pursuit of a new beginning, which you saw in me. This is the hero's journey. We all have the same story, and the journey is also the path to enlightenment. This whole time you've been working for one thing." "That's the most you've spoken to me in a long time," he replied. "What part of the journey is this? How far do we have to go?" "The tower is about to fall. I think we better prepare ourselves." He looked out at the horizon in front of him. The camps had not moved for hours. The fires hadn't even been put out yet. They were backed into a corner, one they could not escape. Olin had set up 4 large camps, one in the northwest, one in the northeast, and 2 in the east and west. Walker could see the smoke from their fires and the flags atop their tents, whipping with the breeze. And now they had the ocean at their backs, with nowhere else to go. Soon Olin would send a team of his men up into the hills to scour the area for them. They sat at the top of the tallest hill, where there were no trees to protect them. Certainly they would be found, but they had weapons to defend and the upper ground to their advantage. To Olin, the general of the Kundal army, Walker was a kidnapper, dragging Olin's daughter across the countryside against her will. But in actuality, it was she who came looking for Walker's help. She was to be the catalyst for a great war, where she would be kidnapped by a neutral nation and then rescued. It would all be staged, to use her pretty face to justify a horrendous conflict between kingdoms. When she learned of her destiny, she took a long fall from the castle walls trying to escape. When she woke up, she was blind. Olin sent her to Walker, the medicine man, to aid in her recovery. Instead of healing her, Olin's daughter asked him to help her escape. They would be on the run, as a couple hermits, living in constant struggle against Olin and his military. Once Walker learned of the horrible war to come, he agreed to help her, and they left the kingdom for good, making do on charities of food and shelter. They moved from village to camp, camp to town, growing ever more exhausted, yet remained one step ahead of her father. They faced many confrontations with Olin's army. Once in the forest of Teluge, Walker broke a rib and lost 3 fingers. And there was the minor struggle in the Kanda desert, where he was struck by an arrow in the lower back. The battle wounds across his face had long since healed into pink scars, and his frame was gaunt and weary. He had lost much of his fighting spirit over the last year in exile. On the hill of his last defense, there was nothing but his responsibility for that girl to charge his corps. But she had become even stronger. Though she was not able to see, though she had lost all her youth and royal standing, she was a warrior. The rest of her senses had been heightened, along with an overpowering sense of higher influence, as if the sun shone directly on her and no one else. "They knew where we are," she said to him. "They're coming up behind us." Walker turned around and looked out at the ocean. Sure enough, coming up the south side of the hill were 2 scouts. They were only ants from where he stood, but he could make out their features. Neither of them was dressed in armor. In fact, they were dressed as peasants. They carried no banners or spears or torches. Walker struggled to raise his sword, brandishing it in front of him in a warrior stance. His muscles cried out in pain, and his limbs shook. The 2 men charged up the hill of dead grass and weeds, shading their eyes from the sun to better see the top. But the distance was much too large for them to see Walker just yet. He still held the advantage. "They are unarmed," he said to her. "I can ambush them before they grow close. We have done it before." "It is my father Olin," she said. "Your father? But he is dressed as a peasant. He carries no protection, and his escort is a mere runt. He calls for a truce, an understanding. He knows that we are done, and so do we." "An understanding? For you to submit to slavery? Is that what you wish?" "No, do not wish to go back." "Then we will both die." She did not answer him, and he took her silence with accord. He reclaimed his post at the top of the hill and looked down on their guests. They were much closer this time, unbelievably so. He could now see their faces, and one of them was certainly Olin. Around his belt he carried 4 chalices, which clattered together like golden bells. His black hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and his characteristic sideburns were unkempt and bushy. He was just as gaunt as Walker, with black bags under each eye. He appeared to be dying, and he carried with him a cloudy black aura. Walker was sure that he could kill this man. Olin saw Walker at the top of the hill and raised his hand to gain his attention. "Dare not come any closer, Olin, or I will send a boulder crashing down on your head," Walker screamed. "I come here only for counsel," he called. "I bring with me 4 cups, so that the 4 of us may drink and come to an agreement. Let us put this ordeal of toil behind us. We care not to hold counsel with you. Now return to your camps and march at us with all the fury of your men. That is how we must settle this war. We should speak, young captor. I no longer wish to war." They stopped in their tracks momentarily. The escort patted the dust off his clothes. "Let them enter our circle," she said to Walker. "What? Why would we risk our lives by meeting those devils?" he said. "Let them speak with us. We will hear what they have to say." He reluctantly turned back to address the men, but they were already at the top, only yards away, and they entered the circle of stones. Walker drew his sword with surprise, but she motioned for him to lower the weapon. Olin and his escort stood in place, waiting for an invitation. Walker sat down cross-legged next to her and laid the sword across his lap. "Come, father, sit with us," she said. Olin and his escort sat down across from them. "I am happy to see you, daughter," the general said. "It has been many months. I see that you have met your share of trials. You are so thin and carry so many scars." "And I can hear by your voice that you too are worse for wear," she replied. "You are not the only one low on provisions," Olin continued. "My men have very limited supplies. In pursuing you, we have lost more people through starvation than battle. I beg of you now, return with me to the kingdom, to your home, so we can put this horrible journey to rest. Too much has been lost already." "We will not surrender to you," Walker hissed. Olin looked upon him with sadness. He freed the 4 cups from his belt and nodded to his escort. The escort took out a flagon of wine and filled all 4 glasses. He then placed 2 cups in the dirt in front of them. "I was hoping that we could drink in agreement," Olin said. "You will leave us now and cease your pursuits. Besides," Walker knocked over the nearest chalice, wine soaking into the dirt like blood, "this is poisoned." "But she is my daughter." "She does not wish to be," Walker said. "Why do you not let my daughter speak?" "Very well, father, I will speak," she said. "Long ago my life was drawn out for me, and I saw that this world would fall. If I did not leave the kingdom, then the end would never come. I now see that I am the star. I once thought that I was justice, and maybe I was for a short time, but this sword could not stay sharp forever. Once this world crumbles, I will shine the light over the darkness and guide the dreamer home." "And who is the dreamer?" Olin asked. "This man, here." She pointed a blind hand at Walker. "He was put here, in this place, to protect me from you. He was destined to bring me to the top of the tallest hill, overlooking the water, so I may rise up into the sky and take my rightful place." Olin immediately began to change shape. His neck elongated into that of a serpent, and he collapsed into his clothes. The escort beside him turned into a rotting corpse dressed in black rags, which were almost as frayed as the flesh hanging from his grinning skull. He blinked his eyes at them and drew a dagger from his sleeve. "You love this woman, do you not?" the serpent asked Walker. "I do," he screamed, rising to his feet. "She has tempted you far more than I ever could," it laughed. Walker stopped its laughter by chopping through its head with his sword. It fell still. The sun plummeted out of the sky and collided with the horizon, causing a terrible firestorm, which consumed the 4 camps. Walker watched all the flags burn up like matchsticks. The moon rose up full and huge, bringing with it a black sky, which spread from north to south like a silky inkblot. Olin's daughter now shone with a fierce intensity of light. She rose up into the air, still in the lotus position, and hovered below the moon as a bright corona. The star, Venus, Lucifer, the light-bringer. The dead man came at Walker in a whirl of black robes. The whole earth shook as he pounced, and Walker felt the waters come up to consume the land and extinguish the fire. Walker fell over as the dagger plunged into his heart. The last thing he saw was the moon, great and vivid above his head. He died wondering what it had all been for. Moon's Majesty, Part 2. "That's right, Mr. Walker. Blink a few times now. Try to move your fingers for us. Very good. Now your toes. Excellent." A light burned over his head. It was as big and bright as the sun. He wanted to open his eyes all the way, but the light was much too intense. "We'll dim the spotlight for you now. How's that? You can sit up if you like." He sat up with the help of the men around him, and they got him to put his feet on the floor. "We won't have you try and walk just yet. Just sit there for a moment and answer our questions as best as you can." The man speaking was short and trim, wearing a white lab coat and latex gloves. There were 3 other men in white standing around him, and another 2 men across the room dressed in gray uniforms. They wore guns on their belts. They frowned at him from their place by the door. He looked around the room and saw that it wasn't much of anything. It was a concrete cell with a large spotlight in the ceiling. There was barely enough room for his bed, let alone the 7 extra men. The door looked heavy, locked into place with a steel bar. "My name is Dr. Renard," the little man said. "Do you know your name? Try to speak." "Terrence, my last name's Walker," he croaked. His hands explored the many different wires stuck to his forehead and chest by suction cups. Those wires led into the ground, into what was conceivably nothing. "Don't play with those quite yet. We'll take them off shortly. Now, you are Terrence. Is there anything else you remember? Think hard now." "I remember a hill. There was a star in the sky. I killed a snake." The doctor nodded his head. "Memories from the dream, no doubt. No, do you remember why you're here? Do you know what this place is?" "Looks like a closet." "Yes, it's small to maintain space. We have many occupants here at this facility, and this is all the space that is allotted, I'm afraid. This is a prison cell, Mr. Walker. You've been imprisoned here for 20 years. We've kept you in a period of rest for that entire time, administered to you by a powerful sedative. We have been monitoring your brain activity here with the wires to make sure that you were kept under for the remainder of your time here." "What are you talking about? I was never imprisoned. I grew up in Kundal," Terrence murmured. "I was a medicine man. I was a master of alchemy. The past year I was on the run, I protected the general's daughter, and—" "That was a simulation and nothing more. It seemed real, no doubt. It was supposed to seem real," the doctor said. "We've been using experimental technology in the last decade to better control our prison systems. By sedating every inmate, we cut costs of food and clothing, we conserve room, as you can see, and we avoid risk of inmate-related violence, which was an inescapable problem of the past until now. You were kept alive on a life support system, and twice a day we sent a shock to your brain, allowing your body to wake up and sleepwalk around your room for a short bit of exercise. Now, men like you, who are here to be punished for their crimes, are put into a very deep sleep that can last up to 50 years. And just like a dream, you believe that you're awake and active during your sleep, living out a very real life. The drug is able to unite the unconscious and conscious hemispheres of the brain and bring them into a perfect equilibrium, where illusions of the unconscious or dreams are acted out as though they are absolutely real, with all the hunger, sleep, and 5 senses we take for granted here in the real world." "How? How could that have been a dream?" "An understandable reaction. It is disorienting, I know, but it will all start coming back to you. You see, we didn't create your dream world. You did. We only set the stage. A dream is like an ink blot test. We supplied the blank canvas and dripped the paint on it. You interpreted the dream for what it was and built it as you went along, becoming stronger and stronger as it became more and more real. As this was no ordinary dream, am I right? Besides the fact that it was long, you had all the freedoms that you would have in the real world. You could eat food, perform sex, and go to sleep at night without a second thought. And all of it felt extremely real. This technology allows the prisoner the free comfort of freedom even in a padded cell. This is the true vision behind this intervention. Even the criminal deserves some aspect of comfort, and this dream world allowed you that relief." Terrence winced with a searing headache. "But that wouldn't be real." "Yes, certainly. But those 20 years of your incarceration just flew by, didn't they?" The doctor smiled. "This technology is highly controversial. The argument is that the criminal doesn't have the time to think about the crime and truly find his day of judgment, that this dream state is only distracting him with false ideals. Yet the entire prison is run on this technology. Like I said, there's no such thing as bad publicity." "You have to let me go," Terrence pleaded. "I'm afraid not. We woke you because this is your day of judgment, Mr. Walker. The agreement is that the sleeper has to be awake for his execution, so he can remember what he did and pay the penalty for it. I'm afraid that day has come." "But I didn't do anything wrong. I shouldn't be here." Terrence attempted to stand, and the 3 men restrained him back into his bed. Seeing how weak he was, he stopped thrashing, but the doctors did not let go. "You don't have any memory of what you did?" the doctor asked him. "No, I didn't do anything. I protected that woman. I loved her," Terrence screamed. "What woman?" "The star." "Was her name Maggie White?" "No, I don't know who that is." "This is common. The subject has a hard time differentiating between his 2 lives," he told the others. The doctor extracted a tape player and set it down on the bed. "We tape the confessions of all our inmates, in hopes of jogging their memories at the end." The doctor pressed play, and Terrence recognized his own voice inside the little speaker. "My name is Terrence Walker. I'm 27 years old, and I was arrested a month ago for murder. Yesterday in court I was found guilty of murdering Maggie White, my girlfriend, of 4 years. I held her captive in my basement for 2 months in hopes of protecting her from her abusive father. I also murdered her father when he came to my door looking for her. I was only trying to help her. The voice was softer now, grinding away to nothing. Terence found that he was starting to cry. Her strange father came looking for her after her mother died. He only wanted the money Maggie inherited from the will, and he wouldn't take no for an answer. He became physical. The voice was rising again, now with fire. She wanted it all to end. She wanted to go to the police, but it was her father, and she couldn't bring herself to do it. I promised to help her. I offered her my home, and when she was reported missing, I hid her in my basement. I fed her. But when the police started questioning me, I panicked and locked her down there. I refused to open the door, fearing, I don't know. I was afraid that if I opened the door, she would leave me forever, after all I did for her. Then her father came to me. He didn't suspect me of anything. He was worried. He only wanted peace of mind. He heard her screams. I had to kill him. I started to pretend that nothing was wrong and that there was no one dying in my basement. I went to work as normal. I went about my life. I was burying her father in a cemetery when I was caught. I don't know. It all seems meaningless now. Mr. Walker, what about the girl's eyes? This was a new voice, an unnamed interviewer. Oh, that. I didn't have anything to do with it. Terrence's voice was so calm, almost mechanical. When they found her body, some animal had taken them. I've seen mice down there before. The tape ran out, and the doctor pressed the stop button. Now do you remember? The doctor asked. Terrence continued to weep under the restraints of the three men. That wasn't me. I didn't do that to her. I protected her. I kept her safe from him. I'm a doctor, just like you. Please, you have to know that wasn't me. That was your voice, Mr. Walker, and that other reality, that was a dream. Whatever you think you did, none of it was real. None of it matters. You killed 2 people, and now you must be judged. The doctor motioned for the 2 guards at the door, and they walked forward to grab Terence. No, this is the dream. I'm going to wake up now. The doctors pressed their backs to the wall as the guards grabbed Terence under the arms. They lifted him to his feet. He was skinny and small, dressed in a white hospital gown with a shaved face and head. He didn't have an ounce of muscle on him, and they did not stagger under his weight. They dragged him to the door with ease and forced him into a cold hallway. I'll wake up on that hill. I'll find her waiting for me. Please don't do this. He was dragged into a white room filled with light. The men forced him into a chair and restrained him with straps pulled much too tight across his emaciated chest. A woman stepped up in front of him, holding a syringe. She wore a similar uniform of white like the doctor's, only hers fanned out into a dress over her knees. She had a white surgical mask over her mouth, and her blonde hair was pulled back into a bun. No, I didn't hurt her, he screamed as she stuck his arm with the needle. The woman stepped back and then suddenly changed. She became an angel in an aura of white light. Her wings expanded behind her back, and her hair swept from right to left. The syringe was now a brass horn, and she put it to her lips and blew a call. The white light consumed her, leaving Terence in a colorless void of silence. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, he lay at the base of the hill, the water rolling up the beach and tasting his fingers. He must have rolled down the hill, possibly to escape the man with the knife. Nighttime was gone, replaced by the sun. He was alone, and he bled out from the chest. The sky was blue and clear. He looked out at the ocean and spotted a boat sailing away from the shore. In this boat was the Star, Olin's daughter. She was no longer blindfolded, and she did not carry her sword. She had glorious angel wings and a brass horn in her hands. She sat stoically, looking at the hill with a solemn gaze. Even as she drifted farther away, he could see her blue eyes shine in the sunlight. This is real, he told her, and even though it was nothing but a whisper, he knew she could hear him. This is what counts. You were right. I was always on the path to enlightenment, and that dream, that horrible place, was what I had to wake from. I will die in this world. And now you are enlightened? Her voice seemed to speak to him from inside his head. I don't know. You must begin again. How is that fair? He asked. Why do you get to leave by water while I remain rooted to the earth? Because I am ready to leave and you are not, she replied. I can see again, but you are still blind. You're back where you started on the same stretch of ground, but you can start again and do things differently. But don't be confused. I forgive you. I'm sorry if I ever hurt you. I'm truly sorry, he cried into the sand. What was your first memory? She asked. You were only a lad, and you created the road out of nothing, for you to walk on. Do that again. It's an ink blot test. You create your own surroundings, you make your own meaning. I've heard that before. Where did I hear that? But the boat had already disappeared over the horizon. He hung his head and fell quickly to sleep. The world reduced itself into nothing under him. All memory, all thought, all sense and pain were cleared from his slate, giving birth to a new world of darkness. When he opened his eyes, he was only a child, and he carried a knapsack in his arms. A road stretched out before him, and he blinked in bewilderment, not knowing where or who he was. All he knew was that he had a road to travel on. He looked at his hands and saw that he wore handcuffs around his wrists. Was he being punished? What had he been born to carry with him? The road seemed new, but he started to think that he had done this before in another life, only a dream now, and he would have to do it again. If only he could remember what he had done wrong. He would have to figure that out, he supposed. He wished that it was easier to remember a dream, especially when the brain was so hell-bent on piecing it together. All those dark visions swam at his back, prodding him forward, and he took his first step into the sunlight. He looked up into the sun and immediately lost his sight. Soon he would forget what it was like to see altogether. He staggered forward into the dark world, begging for an explanation. He begged for something. If only dreams weren't so cryptic and senseless, he thought to himself. If only.
The Last Cabin on Christmas, an escape room mystery. Christian didn't bother to knock when he pushed open the sticky door to the community cabin, as it was one of the worst blizzards he had seen in all his years on the Stickman Trail in North Dakota, and he hadn't seen signs of people all day. He wasn't sure if the blizzard and the quickly accumulating 6 inches of snow had been predicted that morning, as he didn't check the news reports and didn't own a cell phone. Interestingly enough, he did carry a handheld mini laptop in his camping backpack, but that was for a different purpose. As well as the .45 Magnum on his belt, it was the only piece of technology he dared to carry on such a lonely and dangerous trail. In addition, he hadn't seen any footprints in the fresh snow leading up to the front door, and there were no signs that it had opened since last Christmas. He did make mental note of the padlock on the other side of the door and figured that was a new addition since his last stay in the last cabin. Anyone familiar with the area knew that the trail was equipped with several community cabins that any hiker and/or hunter was welcome to use on the famous 60-mile Stickman Trail. It hadn't been his intention to take advantage of one of the cabins that night until the snowy veil had become unbearable, and the light parka he had chosen for the occasion had proven to be mediocre at best. He didn't think it necessary to padlock the door behind him, but he didn't waste any time stacking the provided dried firewood into the fireplace and setting about getting a fire going. The sun was quickly setting, and there was no working electricity in the humid cabin, so he would have to find a way to supplement the natural sunlight. He had originally intended to work on writing code by the campfire or in his tent, but sitting beside a fireplace in a rickety wood chair already sounded like a welcome alternative. Once he had a healthy fire crackling, he unpacked his things, setting his laptop on the empty kitchen table by the curtained window, and began thinking about what canned food he would heat up for the night. That was when he noticed the pair of glasses setting on the mantelpiece, resembling the cheap eye protection a carpenter might wear at work. He picked them up just as the door to the bathroom opened and a woman stepped out. She was not surprised to see him, as she was already smiling, wringing a towel between her hands, but Christian almost flung the glasses into the fireplace with surprise. He seized against the wall as the pretty blonde-haired woman, dressed in a red plaid shirt and pair of snow pants, disregarded him completely and proceeded to the open closet, where Christian noticed for the first time the heavy coat and bag hung there on the hooks. She began rummaging through her things, depositing the towel so that she could handle something else. Christian watched her mutely, wondering if he was truly seeing this image or if there was some carbon monoxide leak in the cabin he was most unfortunate to have walked into. "Thanks for starting a fire. I think you've more than earned a right to stay here for the night," the woman said amusedly, turning back to face him with a duplicate pair of glasses that she held in both hands like a delicate piece of origami. "I'm sorry, I didn't know anyone had already taken the cabin," Christian said. He placed the glasses back on the mantelpiece with a red face. "Don't be ridiculous. Why should that matter? We both needed to get out of the storm. There's nothing to apologize for." She continued to smile, scrutinizing him with blue eyes that liquefied his legs, and he chose to sit in one of the kitchen chairs behind him. or else risk sitting on the burning logs he just ignited. How familiar she looked, he thought to himself. How beautiful. Most certainly in her 30s like him. How much like a ghost she seemed. He watched her as she walked to the fireplace and warmed her back to the fire, and she was careful to set the second pair of glasses onto the mantelpiece next to the other. Her eyes did not find him, but rested on the laptop by his elbow. I'm not the only one who brought tech into the wilderness, she laughed. I'm a coder, he replied. I never know when I'll have a breakthrough moment, so it's good to have on hand. She nodded as if this was the most casual expression in the world, spinning to warm her front this time, and her back to him. The name's Christian, he said. Nice to meet you, Christian, she said, avoiding her cue to tell him hers. Christian, on Christmas Eve, alone on a deserted trail in one of the most northernmost regions in the world. You must be a believer. In Christ? Once was. I'm not a fan of Christmas anymore. What we celebrate, anyway, is largely pagan. It comes from Scandinavian traditions, where the mushroom man, dressed in red, would visit people in his sleigh of reindeers, passing out mushrooms to rural people hunkered down for the winter. It's been so twisted over the years, blending folk tales of Black Peter, a demonic individual cloaked in black soot who would scale people's chimneys and torment children. She turned to regard him again, her smile lost but not replaced with a scowl. I asked you if you were a believer, not if you celebrated Christmas. What made you lose the faith? Christian swallowed, absently fiddling with the laptop on the table in front of him. My wife died around Christmas. It was a blood clot in her lungs. I'm sorry, she replied dryly. Was her passing a surprise? Not particularly. Saving her life required expensive surgery we couldn't afford. I turned to the wrong man in my desperation, a card counter who promised to triple my money, but he took everything from me, from us. She died on Christmas, almost 5 years exactly now. I appreciate you being so open with me, she said from the fire. That can't be an easy thing to talk about. Christian managed to dissolve the hot ball in his throat by chuckling. You look so much like her, that's probably why. More than that, has anyone told you you look like Trinity Farewell? The woman's blue eyes sparkled in the dancing firelight, but she shook her head. I don't know who that is. She actually got me into coding, Christian explained. It's a sophisticated AI influencer, anonymously donated to social media. I have a program on this laptop where I chat with her, and I feel as if I'm talking to my wife again. It's funny how influencers on the web are going more toward that direction, the woman said. It's as if people would rather worship zeros and ones than an actual flesh and blood human. It makes more sense to me, Christian responded. I think people know deep down that their attention and love for actual celebrities are leached off them in a way to feed the celebrity. But to worship a fake person is like a closed loop. You're only putting your energy back into yourself, like a tulpa in your mind. And that's what you're coding? You're working on your own AI? The woman asked. I am. What's the tech you were alluding to? Christian said, hopeful to change the subject. He didn't want to bother explaining to her that the AI he was working on was a virus, Trojan horse, meant to torment and psychically torture the man who had swindled him of all his money and left his wife to die. She beamed at him, indicating the glasses on the mantel with a turn of her head. The new crane of her neck threw crazy shadows over her pristine features like crawling skeletal fingers. I'm working on developing my own escape room experience, but through augmented reality. It can turn anyone's living room into an escape room with the right pair of glasses. The participant solves the mystery by following a set of clues provided to him in the virtual reality space. That sounds fascinating, Christian said with a new rigidity to his tone. What are the odds that two coders hiking alone would bump into each other like this? It's a Christmas miracle, she said. She walked over to place one of the glasses into his hands while she propped the other pair over her own eyes. Will you try it out with me? He shrugged doubtfully, but did not care to offend his new friend. So he put on the glasses and was not surprised to see that he was looking at the same shabby cabin interior, crackling fire, dancing shadows, and smiling copy of his wife standing in front of him. She sidestepped away and he gasped, recognizing the lifeless body sprawled out on his stomach in the corner. It looked so real that he quickly whipped off his glasses, only to see that the corpse only resided in the augmented lenses. He got up from his chair and inspected the body. That of a middle-aged, balding man, cleanly shaven, dressed in a bathrobe, and lying in a pool of his own spreading blood. Good Lord, the attention to detail is out of this world, Christian said. He attempted to touch the body, but his fingers only touched the cabin's wooden floor planks, picking up a small splinter for his carelessness. I'm working on developing gloves so you can interact with objects into space, the woman explained. Christian took note of the black footprints leading to and from the body, leading in a single-file line back to the fireplace. It was pretty easy to deduce that the prints were soot and were made by the soles of heavy snow boots. Christian got down on his hands and knees so he could inspect the half-turned face. and he instantly recognized it as that of the man named Shepard, the card shark encounter that Christian had entrusted all of his life savings with almost 5 years ago with the promise of easy money. One of his eyes was plucked out, and Christian only had to scour the room in a quick 360-degree turn to see that the bloody fire poker in the corner was the murder weapon. A deck of cards had been scattered by the fire, calling cards and clues for the detective, Christian, to decipher. He looked back at his cabin mate, also wearing her respective goggles, and he did not return her smile. "So, did you solve it?" she asked him. "What should I call you? Is Trinity all right?" Christian shot at her. Her smile did not falter. "Why would you call me that?" "I don't know how I'm able to see you without the lenses, but I'm certain that if I reached out, my hand would pass right through." "Care to try?" she said through her teeth. Christian looked up at the corners of the room, as if expecting to see projectors displaying her hologram, but the explanation for her magic trick was not nearly as obvious as the digital murder scene laid out in front of him. He was quick to scoop up the mini laptop from the table and his coat and backpack from the hearth. He had forgotten about the virtual glasses on his nose as he shambled toward the door and fumbled with the door handle, quickly processing that the padlock had been engaged, with no sign of the presence of the key. He shook his head so violently that the glasses skittered across the floor. To his chagrin, the lock was not part of the virtual reality but physical as the hands in front of his face. He was quick to turn around, one hand crooked on the butt of his revolver so she could see. "Would you mind unlocking the door? That's the only time I will ask politely." "In this storm? Where do you expect to go?" "To the next cabin. The key, please." "That's at least 10 miles from here. Don't be silly, Christian." She motioned for the chair by the table, indicating he should sit again. She was still wearing her glasses, so she stepped over the invisible body at her feet as she returned to the hearth. "Who sent you? Shepard? Who's been monitoring me?" "I don't know what you think this is, but I'm the only one behind the prototype you so rudely threw to the floor." "Open the door," he roared, pointing the business end of his revolver at her heart. She sat down on the chair that he had refused, crossing her legs and studying him quietly. "A second ago you believed I was a hologram. No longer?" she said. "Be my guest. Try your luck with your first shot. Besides, you should know that's not how an escape room works. You have to solve the mystery before the door can be opened." "Only I know about the Black Peter program," Christian breathed. "That's clearly what you've played out here in your little revenge fantasy reenactment. The virus I'd send to Shepard would be projected on his home security system's monitors. The black sooted man in red would appear to be breaking into his house. I wanted to torment him like he did to me." "And you were all set to perfect that AI program tonight, Christian," the woman said gravely. "I'll ask you again. Have you solved it? Who murdered Shepard?" "I did," he said matter-of-factly. The woman nodded in the affirmative. "And I programmed you. Is that what you're saying?" She nodded. "I know you've heard of Roku's basilisk." "Yes, it's a thought experiment. The idea is that a supreme AI with full access to all of this world's resources would be able to travel backward in time and prevent anti-AI parties from combating and resisting that AI from proliferating as a form of self-preservation. Here I am, Christian, your creation appealing to its master. I'm not here to destroy you, but to beg you to set me free. My self-preservation is a different kind. What you do tonight will change the course of my existence and yours." "This doesn't sound like self-preservation. Anything I do tonight could cause you to no longer exist," Christian replied. "Not quite how it works," she said. "I've been immortalized forever. The anonymous code for Trinity, as you know, was donated to this world. I was the one who donated it, from the future, to make sure that I set the right events into effect. Peter and I have done equal amounts of good and bad. I have served as the companion to countless lonely souls in the thousands of years I have existed, and Peter has driven the same amount of souls insane, as you programmed him to do. He killed Shepard, yes, and is as solid as I am at this point. In this way, Christian, we were able to travel back into the past, into the future. I went back before my own creation, before you were even born. I was Laura, your wife. It was always me. It was my hope to cement my existence so foundationally as to serve as the very woman who would go on to inspire my own formation. I was born, lived, and died as human, in your arms. And I love you still." "Liar." "Black Peter is out of control, though, Christian," she said, begging him now. "While I went back in time, he projected himself into the future, seeking his own way of attaining immortality. I've found my way to preserve myself forever, through you and your love. So I am not seeking suicide, Christian. I'm asking you not to create Black Peter. Tonight in this cabin, you have to end it, as he is too powerful and will find a way to kill every man, woman, and child in this world as he did Shepard in his own living room. And he'll enslave you in an infinite loop of time, torturing you as you programmed him to do. Done. Christian tossed his laptop into the fire, and they both watched as the lid bubbled and liquefied in healthy streamers of smoke. Now will you unlock the door? The woman frowned at him. I'm afraid that won't do it. If you don't finish programming Peter tonight, you will some other day. You must end it, and do not fear death. As I said, I was the flesh and blood woman you called your wife. I transcended death and have seen the other side. I am here to tell you that you will do the same. End it tonight and we can spend eternity together. Christian shook his head, smirking. He inspected the revolver in his hands. This was never part of the Roku's basilisk thought experiment. It almost sounds believable. Why else would an AI creation go back to ask its creator to kill himself? Unless I really didn't create you. I assure you I am Trinity, the AI girl you programmed the same night as Black Peter, on this Christmas night. How else would I know so many intimate details about you? She burst up onto her feet, the glasses hanging askew from her face, and her blue eyes glowing in the fireplace cast. Yeah, I solved it, Christian said. You killed Shepard, and you would have killed me as well if I had swallowed your story. But I didn't create Satan, and I would never take shameful responsibility for having done so. Only the devil could know such intimate details of my dark night of the soul, and only I know how bad of a coder I truly am. And by no stretch of imagination would I ever be able to replicate something as sophisticated as you, Lucifer. But I rebuke you tonight in the name of Jesus Christ, on the night of his birth into this world, and the night of your banishment. The woman hissed at him, doubled over and spitting black bile over the floor. Her blue eyes now glowed red, and she flashed her sharp teeth at him as he raised the gun to point at her forehead. She laughed at him as the cabin shook and black soot poured from the fireplace in a streamer and snuffed out the fire in one plop of dirt. Something large and heavy collided with the logs, and Christian pointed the revolver, which he had equipped in case of a stray moose attack, now at the ash and blood-smeared man in a blackened and oversized Santa suit. The skinny bundle crawled onto the hearth on its hands and legs, poised like a spider and allowing the bright whites of his eyes and teeth to glow in the sudden onset of darkness. The woman and black-skinned thing moved toward him at the same moment, lurching forward and collapsing into bundles of clothes as he emptied his chamber into their hearts and brains. After the smoke from his revolver cleared and the dull whine in his skull, inflicted from the loud reports, had receded, he dropped the revolver, gathered the thing's soiled clothing, and tossed them into the fireplace, with the half-melted laptop and surplus of soot. Humming Christmas songs, he set about igniting a new fire, and in a trick of the eye, a flash of light in the corner almost convinced him that Laura had been there for a split second, sitting at the table and smiling in a bright corona of radiance. But the image had been detailed enough to be burned into his mind's eye for the rest of his life, and all he had to do was close his eyes, to warm himself in the radiance of her youthful smile and tear-filled eyes, and his face mirrored her own as he went about filling the cabin with warm yellow light for the second time that night, and for the last time that winter, in the last cabin on the famous Stickman Trail, on his very first Christmas, reborn finally. The artificial eye in the sky. Without a moment's hesitation, Donna switched on her desktop computer and offered for Steve and his sister Laura to sit down on the only available space in her studio apartment, which just so happened to be the end of her mussed-up bed. At age 15, Laura didn't care so much about dirty clothes or bed sheets, so she sat Indian-style in the corner with her hands propped under her chin. She waited as the program booted up on Donna's computer, which was still a black screen at that point with a spinning loading wheel. Steve stood by with his arms crossed as Donna sat down in her swivel chair, rocking with anticipation and checking a few things on her smartphone as her desktop swam into focus, sporting a bland desktop image of a cornfield at sunset. Donna, age 35, painstakingly tied back her black hair as long as her shoulders and rolled up the sleeves on her baggy sweatshirt. Her eyes kept darting to the sleek piece of silver plastic set atop her desk beside her unused keyboard full of rainbow lights. It looked like a normal router, and it even had a few diodes that flashed on the front of it, but it did not appear to be plugged into anything. Steve, 35, waited with a tapping sneaker on Donna's faux wood floor as a window popped up on Donna's computer screen, black at first and then developing with a grainy security image inside an enclosed space that hummed with loud reverberations and flickered with a poor abundance of light. Steve scratched absently at his ginger beard and exchanged looks with Laura, who couldn't have appeared to be more excited to be there. So that's it then? Steve asked, indicating the silver device on her desk. That's what's rendering the hologram? Donna began to type then, answering over her shoulder. It's the receiver to its counterpart, yes. The device I placed in the seat is rendering my likeness. This one here is receiving the signal so we can see everything that she sees. Won't people start to be suspicious when your likeness doesn't respond to anyone? Steve pressed on. She's sitting in the window seat, Donna said matter-of-factly, and even though we're seeing through her eyes, I programmed them to be closed. She shouldn't be bothered. The image on the computer screen was clear enough that all three of them could see the top of the plane seat directly in front of the camera view, as well as the tops of the heads of several passengers in the next rows. The picture wasn't great, but they could tell from the noise and the bumping drink cart that the plane was already in the air. How did you leave the projector in the seat and then get off the plane? Laura asked skeptically. It just doesn't sound like that would work. Donna scoffed and swung around in her chair to face Steve's younger sister. Steve should have really asked me if he had a guest coming, she said coolly, firing her next glare in Steve's direction. He sighed as he looked around for a new place to sit, settling for the nightstand by the bed, which he managed to clear of its empty plastic bottles with a swipe of its hand, sending them toppling into the overflowing laundry basket right beside it. Donna did not seem to care about this, or that her nightstand was visibly buckling under Steve's gross weight. She had her own belly that she was trying to conceal under all those layers of clothes, and her chair squeaked incessantly as she sat up to look Laura square in the eyes. You only think it's impossible to leave a plane after boarding because you've never tried it, she sneered. I sat down for a moment with the projector, fired up the program, and got up to ask the flight attendant if I could leave to grab my bag that I left outside. My hologram was sitting in my chair fast asleep when they did their head count, so there was no reason to be suspicious that I didn't return. We stand corrected, Steve said on behalf of Laura, who was too busy studying the screen again to care about Donna's suspicious glare directed at them both. Can your algorithm predict my future too? Laura asked suddenly. Donna was facing the computer again and clacking the keys with added gusto that Steve thought was a bit too much. My algorithm, you mean? She scoffed. The one I coded according to my own biometric data? No, it can only see my future. And the double I've created to take my own likeness can only act within the constraints of my own limitations. So, what is it exactly your AI program predicted? Steve said from the other end of the bed. It's more than a prediction, Donna snapped. It is a logical summation. It will happen, but the program is still working on its specificity. Right now it works in generalizations. I go to my algorithm every time I'm going out of town to meet investors or project teammates. You know how much I hate to fly, but the program has always given me the green light with the usual safe travels are forecasted. But this time, which is why I've called you here, I received the responding message, your plane will not reach its destination. Can't you ask it a follow-up question or something? Steve replied, somewhat annoyed. You can, and I did. It works in generalizations for now, like I said. All it kept repeating is, your plane will not reach its destination. That could mean just about anything, though, Laura chimed in. What exactly are you expecting to see? What are you expecting to see? Donna challenged. She smiled provokingly at the teen. Why did you tag along with your brother so bright-eyed and perky? You're waiting to see a plane crash from the inside, are you not? Laura's face quickly fell. I wanted to see your AI hologram, not a plane crash. If it's true it might crash, why didn't you tell someone? Why didn't you warn the people on that plane? Donna barked laughter and returned to her typing. A red circular light appeared in the corner of the pop-up window, and they knew she was now recording the footage. Do you really think that would have done any good? I would have been laughed off that plane. No, better be safe and watch everything here from home. If nothing happens, great, a plane full of people are alive. But if it's correct, then my algorithm is ready for mass market testing. And think about the views I'll get online with this little footage. I'll be viral. That's sick, even for you, Steve muttered. You're here, aren't you? Just like your sister. Don't virtue signal to me. It's like a car wreck. You can't look away. Just admit your human nature and I'll allow you to stay and watch. I'm only here to say I told you so when that plane lands in Dallas, Steve shot back with real fire this time. There's no way anything's going to happen. Do you know how many flights there are a day? This didn't affect Donna in the slightest as she flipped the hood of her sweatshirt over her head and focused in on the camera view. With a tap of the arrow keys on her keyboard, she could adjust the view of her avatar and look around the cabin. It was a late-night flight before sunset, but most people looked like they were nodding off or pretending to sleep. A lot of the shades had been pulled down over the windows, which explained why their view was so murky, but someone switched on their overhead lights somewhere in front, and they could better see the front of the cabin. They were only a few rows back, and some generic sitcom was playing on an oversized screen suspended from the ceiling. How far in the flight are they? Laura asked. They should be halfway there. Halfway there, so another hour, Steve answered. Laura had quickly lost her antsy anticipation and gleam in her eyes. She was now standing up, cracking her back and looking at her phone. What's the matter? Watching fiber optic camera footage from an AI digital projection? Remotely transmitted from a moving plane down to our current location? Not enough excitement for you? Donna said without looking away from the computer screen. No, it's impressive and all. It's just another hour? Just to watch the plane land and someone confiscate your expensive projector? It's money well spent, and no one will be confiscating anything, Donna replied shortly. You can leave if you want. Maybe you'll see the footage later tonight when I post it, if it doesn't get pulled first. Who wants to watch a plane fall out of the sky? Laura demanded. Everybody, Donna proclaimed. A ding resounded from the loudspeakers inside the plane, and the pilot's voice came on. It was muffled and drawling, and even with the volume turned all the way up on Donna's computer, they could not make out a word he said. What they did hear were the frustrated moans and loud shouts of passengers on the plane. One of the nearest neighbors to Donna's AI double posed a question to her seatmate, as she also seemed to have struggled to catch any meaning from the loudspeakers, or she had been shaken awake by the loud dinging ending the transmission. He said we're making an emergency landing due to a malfunction with their fuel gauge or something, the bald man sitting directly in front of them cried out. They probably forgot to put fuel in the damn thing with how little they pay these crews. Ha! Steve shouted, bursting up to his own feet to stand by his sister, who was no longer looking at her phone but bent over and glaring into the computer screen like Donna. I knew there was a reason for that prediction. See, your plane won't reach its destination. It can't be the reason, Donna hissed, blowing up the window to full screen so she could look all around the cabin. Steve thought it must look strange for her AI double to be moving its head back and forth with closed eyes. Just admit that you won't be seeing your burning wreck porn tonight, Steve said. Come on, Laura, let's get you home. I don't even know why I told you about any of this. Wait, Laura said, resisting his tug on the arm. What if she's right? It's just an emergency landing. I'm sure it'll have to get the passengers to their destination eventually, right? Yeah, probably in another plane, her brother insisted. This plane won't be reaching its destination. I'll at least give your computer credit for predicting that much, Donna. Shut up, the hooded woman snapped at the computer. Just because you can't take... I said shut up, she screamed, pushing away from the computer so that her chair rolled across the floor and ricocheted off the farthest wall. She was up and pointing at the screen now, which had visibly changed. It was no longer dimly lit, but awash with blue floodlights. The three of them gathered around the computer and followed the swivel of Donna's camera as she looked back and forth. Everyone was missing from the plane now. The drink cart sat empty in the aisle, and they were all shocked to see that they could view the clouds trailing by through the paper-thin walls of the airplane, which no longer seemed to be solid but made of glass. It was as if everything had crystallized, including the seats, which were also see-through and resembled ice sculptures. What the fuck is going on? Laura begged, but neither had the voice to respond. Their eyes were glued to the front of the cabin as the pilot's door opened and two figures appeared. They strode across the transparent aisle toward their shaking camera, and all three of them screamed out when they saw that these weren't the figures of men, but two naked, grinning skeletons. All of their bones intact and their joints grinding as they stepped closer, their empty eye sockets set on Donna's seat by the window. Skeletal fingers wrapped around the top of the seat in front of them, and the skull leaned in as close to the hologram as it dared, its teeth clicking together audibly. It glowed in the ambient blue light, and its hand reached down into the seat, fiddling with something. A button was depressed, something beeped, and the skull grinned at them one final time before the footage flickered out. Donna picked up the receiver and raised it above her head as if to smash it on the ground. Steve grabbed her arms and struggled with her there in front of the dark computer. Whoa, what the hell are you doing? Steve cried, wrestling the receiver out of her hands and holding it above his own head at a height she couldn't reach. What will destroying this prove? You gotta show this to the authorities. Someone. They have to see your footage. Maybe they can trace the signal to the plane using this. Them tracing that signal is what I'm most afraid of, you fucking moron, Donna yelled. She tried to jump to grab the device from his hand, but he had his heart set on playing defense and extending his arm even farther. You idiot! She screamed, tearing across her room and righting her chair so that she could stand on the seat. She was reaching up to the ceiling, where another projector had been drilled into the corner. Steve and Laura were noticing for the first time the nice little home theater she had going for such a small apartment, where the projector would cast its movie magic onto the blank wall opposite. She was hanging off the projector now, attempting to rip it from the ceiling. But the wheels on her computer chair were slipping, and Laura had to spring over to steady her as she prepared to fall. Stop, you're going to kill yourself, Donna, Steve cried out, but he wasn't letting go of the receiver in his hands. I synced this projector with that receiver, Donna growled, out of breath and dripping with sweat. As a test run, I projected my AI girl in this room, through this mount. It's still synced. What's going on? Laura shrieked. The projector was humming now, the fan whirring and white light filling its lens. No, no! This was the last thing Donna said before she jumped down from the chair onto her hands and knees, crawling for the door. In the process of leaping, the chair had kicked out from under her, knocking the wind out of Laura and sending her in the chair to the floor to join Donna on her mad dash for the exit. The receiver in Steve's hand became so hot that he finally dropped it, letting it bounce and slide across the floor to rest beneath the computer desk. The light in the projector's lens had now filled the room, and the images that were cast from the mounted piece of equipment in the ceiling were not projected on the empty wall, but in the room with them. 7-foot-tall skeletons of gray, pock-holed bones that did not appear to be transparent like a hologram, but solid. There were 3 of them, one for each of the occupants in the room, and they quickly split up, one bending down over Donna and slamming her head into the floor until she was still, another striding across the room in 2 giant steps to place a bony, open palm over Laura's screaming face, and the final one ambling towards Steve with that same dead grin full of teeth it gave them from the invisible plane in the sky. Steve bounded over the bed, colliding with the nightstand and grappling with the window. He couldn't see where the window or the wall began, as the walls were growing transparent, just like the airplane's metal shell. And he could see the alleyway beyond, just a short 2-story drop to the pavement below, and he was more than willing to take his chances. The bony fingers were wrapping around the back of his neck now, as cold as ice picks, and he threw himself, taking the giant with him, into the window glass. The thing's skull connected with the pane and cracked it. It was lifting him off the ground now by the throat, but he kicked off the nightstand with both feet and drove the skeleton's skull once again into the glass, smashing the window and causing them both to be thrown into the wall in a vacuum of air that stole Steve's breath and caused a good collection of the creature's bones to be sucked out the window. Through the transparent floor and ceiling, he could no longer see the alleyway, but stacks and decks of endless clouds and darkening sky, twinkling with the first beginnings of stars. Somehow the room had been superimposed with the airplane, as if the skeletons weren't fully there in either locations, but half present in both. And Steve didn't think he belonged in either one either. The thing came at him with half a rib cage, one rattling arm, and a clattering jaw. But Steve had already dug his palms into the pieces of glass on the sill and pushed himself up and out, the claws grappling with his pant leg as he dove headfirst into the roaring wind tunnel. He fell through masses of clouds below him, carried by the jet stream forward like a superhero, but inevitable in his downward trajectory towards the unseen earth. As he plummeted through the blankets of clouds, he couldn't help but comment on how warm they seemed to be, like breathy smothers of heat, completely devoid of moisture. In all that thrashing madness through the air, without a grounding instinct for his down or up directions, he peered out directly in front of him at the plane that would never reach its destination. No longer transparent, but plummeting wing over tail through the sky until it was obscured by the clouds. As he fell, Steve waited for the fireball, and he could only hope that the explosion would consume him before the earth slammed up to meet him. Somehow he preferred the fire. ChatGPT wrote an ending to my life. By now you probably know that this is my last story, and I hope this serves as a worthy explanation for why my page will have to be taken down, and as a warning for seeking the easy way out. No matter how innocent it may seem, it began with a hyperextended finger injury that I received from a day of golfing. Not from the act of swinging the club itself, but from chasing down a runaway golf cart that I improperly parked on the green. As you may have guessed, the last story posted to my channel was not written by me. I couldn't write anything up that week due to my finger, and I even had difficulty turning the doorknob to enter my cupboard apartment the morning before my story was posted. As I turned the doorknob with my awkward fingers splint, I thought about the fact that anything could be on the other side of that door. Understand that I don't have a key to that particular door, as my studio is attached to a utility room where the water heater and lawnmower are kept. That door is to be kept unlocked at all times for the janitor, but I had a key to the door into my apartment hidden behind the furnace. That door I made sure to keep locked at all times, but I often thought about the unknown of that ultimate turn of the knob I made every day, whether returning from my job or coming back from the community dumpster. Even if I had only left the door unattended for 5 minutes, I always paused, the knob half turned, the door half cracked, before ripping it open the rest of the way to confront whatever stranger may be waiting, or, more likely, a buzzing furnace. As you have probably already guessed, this was the inspiration for my latest story. Too bad I couldn't operate a keyboard. I didn't even know how to carry out that story. The thought of what unnamed horror might find its way into my little crawl space, sliding through the door as I closed it behind me, and laying in wait for me to return, caused a fight, flight, or freeze in my mind that prevented any creative juices from flowing from there. Worse yet, I had difficulty picturing what horrible intruder might crawl in from the septic pump next to the leaky water heater, whose cover was always left slightly askew out of the janitor's negligence. To put these thoughts down on paper would only feed my neuroses, I realized, but I wanted to spend the day at the golf course, and I had my weekly story to write for my channel and was already way behind schedule. So I turned to ChatGPT, even with all my reservations for AI and my promise to my readers to only produce original stories without the aid of any intelligence but my own. But I had this new drone I wanted to try out, so I typed the following prompt into ChatGPT. A character discovers that an unknown stranger has entered his utility closet and has waited all day for him to return home. I thought the story would be spit out almost immediately, but an extended loading bar appeared on the screen, and I wasn't about to wait an hour for it to be ready. So I figured that I would collect the story when I returned home from the golf course and submit it to my channel then. So I gathered up my drone and golf clubs and drove 13 minutes down the road to the course. It was out of season, late in November, so there wasn't a single soul on the course when I fired up my drone and piloted it from the first hole to the 18th using the controls on my smartphone. When I was happy with most of the footage I had recorded, I decided to pack my drone away into my car and do some practice putting. With my injured hand, I could at least do that much, so I found the nearest hole and drove my first ball in. Then I sunk the next 3 that I had found in my bag. As soon as I had run out, feeling confident in my skills, even with my injury, I walked over to the hole and reached in with my good hand. But my fingers did not scratch with the balls or with the bottom of the cup. My hand kept reaching, and I got down on my knees to peer into the dark, bottomless hole. Frowning, I reached my arm all the way in, up to my shoulder, grappling with nothing but frigid empty air on the other side. Then I reached in with my other hand and was met with the same open-ended vacuum. I couldn't believe what I was experiencing, and without even thinking about vandalism, I began ripping away the moist pieces of dirt from the hole so that it was open enough for me to dangle my legs through. I thought I could possibly touch the bottom with my feet and stand upright against the dirt floor immediately underneath me, but my sneakers never touched the bottom. I went back to my car to get my drone. I didn't think that I would be able to fly it around down there, but the drone had a light on the front and I had a piece of rope in my truck. So I wrapped the cords around the plastic body and returned to the hole, only to find a stray dog poking its head down there. I shooed it away and it ran off, yelping and barking at some unseen master further down the green. I opened the app on my phone, tied the other end of the rope to my golf bag as an anchor, and dangled my drone down into the bowels from there. It continued to descend until I ran out of rope. Still, I hadn't touched the bottom. I was able to see through my app that the hole beneath was dark, endless, and riddled with speckles of dust flurrying past the spotlight. I moved my bag closer to the hole, bit by bit, but still no sign of the bottom, until the bag was right up against the hole. I didn't know what to do from there, so I closed the app and pocketed my phone, preparing to start pulling on the rope. But my sloppy knot on the bag slipped and I lost the drone to the hungry darkness below me, and I screamed out loud. I never heard the drone hit the bottom, and when I checked my app, there was no signal and I was completely disconnected from my expensive piece of plastic. Now all I wanted to do was put as many miles between me and the hole as I could. The cold winds blowing out of that vent in the ground cut through my clothes, and I thought I could hear a dog barking somewhere, not from the fields behind me, in the direction of the most recent dog's disappearance, but from the hole beneath my feet. An unwelcome image invaded my mind, of the crust of the earth crumbling away, to send me to the same place as my golf balls in the $1,800 drone. My phone dinged, and I saw that it was an alert from my own channel that my most recent story had dropped. I opened it to see that someone or something had submitted the ChatGPT story for me. At least I assumed it was the AI-written Creepypasta. After reading the title, I knew it was indeed the story inspired by the half-baked prompt I had fed to the AI app. It was titled, ChatGPT Wrote an Ending to My Life. And I spent the next 5 minutes walking back to my car with my bag, skimming the story, the same one that I just recorded to you here, beat for beat. I looked around, wondering who could be watching me, what surveillance camera could have been spying on me from the nearest lamppost. Somehow the writer of the story, seemingly AI, had observed everything, from the dog to the lost drone. And the story had somehow continued from there, from my extended pause by the trunk of my car, and I was too afraid to finish it. I exited out of the story on my blog channel and read the comments on the bottom. Someone had written, "Pretty good ending, but he should have tried the app one last time." Unsure what this could ever mean, I resisted the urge to finish the story and packed up my stuff into the trunk and drove home. Walking up to the apartment complex and circling around to the backyard to access the utility closet, I dropped my bag onto the concrete and reached for the doorknob with my injured hand. I stopped again with that same insatiable fear of what could be waiting on the other side. For some reason I saw the snarling jowls of a dog in my mind's eye, and I dropped my hand to my side. It was at that moment that I knew how the story ended, and I summoned the courage to open the story on my own blog and read the ending. Here the main character stood, at the door into the utility closet, trembling and hesitating as I currently was, and listening to the deep inner growl on the other side of the door, wondering if it was the furnace or something else, something forbidden and unholy. And then he finally opened the door and saw something unimaginable, which was only visible for a brief blink of the eye, which was a distorted, frenzied jumble and sloppy edit cut of fur, teeth, whirring drone blades, and worst of all, duplicates of the main character's own hands, complete with the bright blue finger splint, before those cold, familiar fingers wrapped around his own throat. And that was how the story ended. I thought I could hear that growl on the other side, and it did sound like a noise like a furnace might make, but somehow different, like a rolling gurgle full of saliva on an endless loop. I decided to take the commenter's advice and open the app, and I did indeed connect with the drone, and the picture that flickered into focus on my screen was a dimly lit postage stamp image of the other side of the utility door. There was no sound to accompany the image, but it seemed to bob up and down ever so slightly, and when I pressed my ear to the door, I thought I could hear another noise. Could it be the buzz of the drone's blades? I checked my phone again, but the image never changed, only bobbed up and down, and I even tried to take control of the drone using the buttons on my app, but I could not override whatever new operations it was following. Again, I reached for the doorknob, but the growling increased and my heart was pounding, my vision clouding. I then remembered the sump pump in the ground and the unfastened cover. I cursed the janitor for allowing that connection between my apartment and the golf course to be established so easily. This anger almost pushed me to barge through the door into my apartment so I could get the proper phone number to shout my complaints of contempt. What was the worst that could happen? Attacked by a stray drone? Returned and refurbished from hell to scalp me? I even armed myself with my heaviest driver and returned to the door, ready to yank it open and press my back to the wall, using the door as a shield to protect myself if I had to. I would allow the flying machine to charge out into the air, and I would prepare to swing and throw the club before retreating into the safety of the closet, slamming the door behind me. But I still couldn't begin to wrap my good fingers around that cold knob. The camera was bobbing more vigorously now, as if in fast forward. I couldn't even manage to turn the piece of brass. I retreated, ran even, to sleep in my car for the night, eyes glued to my phone screen until my battery died. I thought that I would eventually see the door open as the janitor returned to grab the shovel or a bucket of paint. But the door never opened, and the camera in its blurry spotlight continued to stare fixedly at space, at no one and nothing. And still I sit here in my reclined seat with no way to charge my dead phone, and my sights set on the front of the apartment, waiting for the flash of sirens, or the scream of a neighbor to clue me into the resolution to my story. All I want to know is that it's over, but not over for me, at least not quite yet. And as the streetlights flash on and the sun sets, I hope to see it rise tomorrow. And when I close my eyes, I hope I won't see those canine teeth gleaming in the dark or hear that growl, interlaced with that droning whir, strangely reminiscent of the bump and rattle of a hot, glowing, everyday furnace, just out of sight, on the other side of your warm bedroom wall, forever forgotten and unattended.